Hi and welcome to another Checiegirl creation DIY video. Now today I'll be showing you how to make two simple Father's Day cards. So you can see one has a medal on it and this one is a little bit more grungy. So I'll be making this one first, and I'll be using some 5x7 card blanks by Craft Paper Mania, and it's already pre-creased, so all I have to do is fold it, and then I use my bone folder just to make sure the creases are nice and crisp. I'll also be using this DIY pattern paper which I made myself, and I will explain a little bit more about that when we start using them. And I'll also be using some ribbon, and I also grunged that up with some ink pads, and I'll be using this jet black dye ink pad, an acrylic block, and some die cuts from MC Boutique. And I'll be using this new stamp set by Hunky Dory, and I'll be using the alphabet stamps. And I'll also be using that stamp set as well, and I use that stamp set to make the DIY pattern paper, which I'll explain a bit more now. So you can see in a bit that I cut down the pattern paper so that there would be a nice border around it on the card, and I'm cutting that into 4cm strips. And I use my new Tim Holtz stamping platform by Tonic Studios to repeatedly stamp on it so that the patterns would be similar. And then I also grunged it up using some ink pads and sponges, just kind of swiping across with my ink pads and sponges so that there would be more of a repeat pattern. And you can see a review I have on the stamp platform and an iCard in the top right hand corner. I really like it, and you'll see how I use it in a few different ways in this video as well. So I'm just grunging up the edges and adding some detail with my ink pad here to the paper, so it looks a little bit better and has a bit more depth. And you can see as I give you a closer look how there's a bit of a repeat pattern. So I'm just lining it up properly so the patterns all match up, and then I'll just put that to the side. So now I'm going to cut out some cardstock using that die there, and it has a stitched border around it as well that doesn't cut all the way through, it's just a pattern. And I'm also using my 300 GSM white card from Poundland, and I'm using this on my Sizzix Big Shot to cut out the rectangle, which I'll use to stamp the sentiment on later. I'm using some book paper, and it's also cut to 4cm wide, and I'm cutting it down a little bit so it creates a nice frame around my cardstock. And I apologize for my croaky voice, my hay fever is really bothering me today, so I sound a bit odd. So now I'm just getting out the stamps that I'll be needing. So I'm just getting out all the letters I need to be able to stamp Happy Father's Day, and I'm just placing them in different spots on the stamping block so I can use them all at once without having to pause to take it off of the packaging. Okay, so now I'm going to use my Tim Holtz stamping platform, and you can see I've just masked off an area because when I was making the first card, I used the graph on that. It's like a very large acrylic block to center where I would put my H, so once I stamp everything else by hand, everything would be as centered, really centered, because I'm really bad at eyeballing those kind of things. So I'm just basically using the lid of the stamping platform as a giant acrylic block, and I think that's really good, especially since it's so sturdy. I can use it by itself and it can pop out. So I think that's a really good idea of how to use it, and I'll definitely be using that technique later on. So now I'm just stamping everything else by hand using my acrylic blocks, and I'm just starting off from the H and stamping on either side until I finish my sentiment. And you'll see that I'm using the middle word, father, to center all my other words as well. So now that I've finished stamping, I'm just using this brown ink pad. I'm sorry, the camera for some reason just wasn't focusing around this point and afterwards. Just had some serious trouble focusing on everything. So I'm using a sponge just to distress the edge a little bit and to make it not look so stark, since everything is a bit off-white and grungy anyway. And now I'm also using my black ink pad as well. So I'm just going around the edge of the book paper, then I'll also go around the edge of the sentiment card. Trying to figure out the placement of the paper, and you'll see that I just put on some double-sided tape and tacky glue to stick it down, and I really like using both of those adhesives. I find that's a really effective way to make sure that everything stays down, especially when there's fabric involved like the ribbon. So I'm just putting everything on my card, just making sure I like the placement, and then I'll get to sticking everything down. And while I'm sticking everything down, I thought I should mention that I'm having a giveaway for 100 subscribers, and the video for that is in the iCard in the top right hand corner, and I'll be giving away one of my mixed media subscription kits, and it's the launch box. So if you're interested in that, please do go and enter. It does end on the 10th, so enter quickly before it ends so you have a chance to win. And if you don't feel like entering the giveaway and just want to get a box, you can get the June box, which is available for order via And now I'm just making sure I get my ribbon in the right place just by marking with the pen. And I'm just using tacky glue on the ribbon for this one. Right, so now for the next one. So I'm using a white card blank 5x7 as well, which is pre-creased, and the camera is freaking out a little bit because it doesn't have anything to focus on, but it'll focus in a bit. So I'm just folding this and using the bone folder like I did on the previous card, and I'm going to use that pearlescent beige color, which is by Checiegirl, and that big stamp. And I have a review on those Checiegirl stamps if you're interested in watching, and you can see that in the top right hand corner as well. And I'll also be using the Tim Holtz stamping platform for that as well. And you can see those papers there. I also inked that up myself using some ink pads. And I'll be using that embossing pad and that white pigment ink pad as well. And those are by Dovecraft, as well as some dies and black card. So I'm just swapping the setting to rubber, and I'm using my magnets to hold everything down, and I'm just going to center up that big stamp so I can stamp it twice just by flipping the card over. And I'm using the beige stamp, and I'm not really inking it up perfectly because I want a patchy stamp. And you can see whenever I'm inking something up, I tend to take off the lid because I don't have that much space on my desk since it's all a little bit messy. So I'll also be using a stitch die from the same stamp set, and I'll just be using that one on the acrylic block, as you can see there, to stamp around the borders. And I'm also doing some second generation stamping as well, since the background I want it to be a little bit imperfect. So you can see I ink it then stamp it again, so it's a little bit lighter. And now I'm just swiping across this the card with my stamp pad, a white pigment ink pad, with a sponge just to lighten some areas a little bit. Now I'm cutting out the metal using my circle, and I'm cutting around the outer edge of that. And now I'm just going to ink the edges of that using the sponge and the ink pad, and then I'll go directly on top of the paper with the ink pad as well. And that's just to add some depth to it, so it looks a little bit more interesting. And now I'm going to cut out some 2cm strips from that red cardstock. And both of those were just made by swiping the ink pads across the paper and then blending with the sponge. And I'm also swiping the edge of the paper with the ink pad to grunge it up a little bit and to add some definition. Now the camera cut off, so you missed me cutting out these letters using some X-cut alphabet dies, but I just used some cardstock, and now I'm just adding highlights with my white gel pen. Run this through my Sizzix Big Shot to flatten the letters so that it's all a little bit more uniform, because when I go to emboss it, then it wouldn't be too raised by the letters. And I didn't do this on my first card, and it's a little bit more raised on that one. So that was just really pressing the letters into the paper. So now I'm just pressing it against the embossing pad, which is basically like a glue pad really. And I'm really pressing down, especially by the letters, just to make sure that the ink pad gets everywhere. And I'm using some clear embossing powder by Paper Mania. And when I put it over, you'll see that it looks a little bit cloudy and sandy. And I'm just making sure to put back the embossing powder into the pot so I don't make any mess. And now I'm just heating up the heat gun, and I like to heat it up for about a minute, so that when I put it against the paper, you can see it instantly embosses. And I'm just adding another layer, and I add about 3 or 4 layers just to make sure it's nice and shiny. And you can see how shiny it gets. You can tell when it's finished embossing because it gets all shiny. And you don't want to hold the heat gun over it for too long, because then the embossing powder will just sink into the paper and it won't look shiny anymore. So once it's shiny, just take it straight off of the spot you were heating and move on to another spot. So you can see it's all nice and shiny. To add some highlights to the red paper strips, which are supposed to be the ribbon for the medal, with my white gel pen. And around this point I realized I didn't add highlights to the medal like I was supposed to, so you'll see later on how I do that. And because my friend wanted a brown background for the medal, which you can also custom order as well through Instagram, I decided to stamp doing the same techniques I did on the white card blank. So now I'm just adding highlights with my white gel pen, and I'm going to go in with a white paint pen and add some thicker highlights as well on the main point where the light would be hitting it. See that highlight's a lot bigger. And then I'm just going to put that to the side to dry before I emboss it again, because I don't want to get any of that paint on my embossing pad. So now I'm sticking everything down using double-sided tape and tacky glue. And when I stick down the medal, I will put a acrylic block on top. And after everything's dry, I'll cut off the red paper strips that's hanging over and put those highlights back on that's been cut off. So I hope you enjoyed the video and you have some good ideas of how to make Father's Day cards, and if you want these, please do follow the link below to order one yourself. So here's some close-ups of the cards, and I hope you join me for another arty adventure. Bye!